want to talk about is another thing that happened December 96 to make the year just god awful. And it was this book, The Outsiders, by S.E. Hinton, who was actually a woman, sort of like J.K. Rowling, wanting to be anonymous so that people wouldn't realize she was a woman. And so that boys would read her books and think the characters were cool and everything, assuming that a man had to have written them. And so The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. When I was in 7th grade, I was reading that book. That's another thing that made the year god awful. Was we were being forced to read these depressing books. Oh, and I hear the train. That's why I like the movie a lot better, because you could hear the train. Favorite sound in the world. But unfortunately, there was this book that predated the movie by a little bit. And one of the worst things about, my 7th grade year was that, I could say it was the most awkward year. Wherein it's like, there it is, my train. Favorite sound. It was an awkward year wherein I felt like, because up until that point, while there were ups and downs, while there were negative things, I didn't really feel as much like people were pushing me to grow up. I mean, to an extent, I felt that, that I was immature and people wanted me to act more mature. But 7th grade was like a turning point, wherein both my parents and teachers took the fun out of reading and school by trying to push on me or force me into content that was too mature. Trying to no longer seeing me as a child. And thereby forcing me to read and consume things that were too, that I wasn't ready for. And I started to feel that in elementary school. But 7th grade is when it just really hit. That my parents, or my mom, really, let's face it, it's just mom. Not only was my mom and my grandmother disappointed in me for not being a normal teenager, not getting into big girl things, not wanting to be in that next stage of development, which had always been the case. But the difference between 12 and a teenager is just bigger. See, when it was the difference between say 9 and 10, or, other age groups, it was still there, but not quite as vast. So me not wanting to get into more mature things like makeup and boys, now that there was a small but growing percentage with a man's voice in my class. And the fact that I was rejecting that and wanting to still cling on to, the security blankets and things that had comforted me all my life. Rejecting femininity with every fiber of my being, just because I saw masculinity as the only other alternative to being a woman. But when I got to 7th grade, it felt like my teachers had jumped on that bandwagon of, you're not mature enough, you need to read these adult level books. And see, the thing about me is I didn't care so much about the book as I cared about making a good grade on the test. Like I wrote in that song about my life sucked in 7th grade. I didn't care so much. My mom accused me of wanting to read books about boys, but that wasn't the case. I would read boys, girls, and if there had been intersex people, I would have read about them too. Did not care about the gender of the protagonist so much as I just wanted a good grade. So I wanted to read something that I thought I could pass on a test. You had to take a test on these books. And in order to get all the points that the book was worth, you had to do well. And also, you had to have so many points every 6 weeks to get an A. And so you were being graded on it. So I didn't really care the gender of the main character so much as I wanted a good grade. So ended up reading a lot of books about boys just because they had a lot of books about boys. And so I picked out this book thinking I could do well on the test, hopefully. And it was worth a lot of points. And I needed them. But what happened was, the last day before our Christmas holiday, I lost that book in the hallway, which was very unusual for me, because I normally carried around this big old briefcase that would keep all my stuff neatly together. Well, on that last day, for whatever reason, I decided to only bring my books in my arm for the first time all semester. And somehow I dropped that book and it got lost in the hall. And that made my Christmas horrible, because I had to pay a teacher for a book that I didn't get to finish reading. And it was just a horrible experience. I ended up crying in front of that teacher, in front of some classmates that I had made fun of all semester for various reasons, in front of that hunky mountain of a man teacher that I thought hung the moon. He wished me a Merry Christmas and saw that I had tears on my face, and it was humiliating. That's what people don't take into consideration. 7th grade was bad because of the humiliation. Not that I had more colds, not that my problems were bigger, but the humiliation was bigger. Because when you're in elementary school and you're crying in front of teachers that are 100% female, it's embarrassing, but it doesn't hit as hard. Then you get to high school and you get a little better control over your emotions so that you don't cry as much in general. But 7th grade is kind of that awkward time wherein you still have a lot of the problems of being a kid, like crying easily and being silly in general about things. But then you're also being introduced to some adult things you're not ready to deal with, such as puberty and such as books, that I feel, in looking back, I would have understood the book a lot better reading it in high school, because it was about high school kids, and it didn't make sense to me because it wasn't clear to me that it was a period piece. Like, I didn't understand how Pony Boy could make straight A's and not do his homework, because I basically spent half my life doing homework. Half my life, or a third of my life in school, a third of my life doing homework, the other third eating and sleeping. And didn't have any friends at all. Well, I did not understand how a boy could hang out with his gangbangers, gang friends all day, yet still be a straight A student. And, in high school, but not do any homework. What I didn't understand is that it was a period piece. And the book was set in the 60s. And that life was very different in the 60s. School was different in the 60s. And that if I'd been going to school 30 years prior, perhaps I could have been an honor student who didn't do any homework. And I didn't understand that school had changed, between my parents. It wasn't made clear to me that these kids were like people that would be older than my parents in real life. But I saw the movie years later with Ralph Macchio and enjoyed that much better. Yeah, I knew how it ended, and I liked the movie a whole lot better than the book. Just wish that they had been graphic, after he killed that boy. It had graphic double vomit scene. And the fact that his name is Ralph Macchio, and that's a synonym for vomit, along with Chuck and Earl and Huey. Ralph Macchio and, the Pony Boy kid, ironically, who had a deeper voice than he did. That would have been freaking awesome. I'd probably play that dozens of times a day. If only they could have made it like a graphic, puke scene like I'd rather see. But, yeah, so my teens were very, and it just made my Christmas horrible. It's like the crappiest Christmas. I'm sure other bad things have happened around Christmas, but that year was just Christmas. May as well have not even come. Because I didn't have my baby pillow that had been my security blanket my whole life, was being punished in that way. And I had lost this book accidentally, and it caused me to cry in front of that female English teacher, my handsome, gorgeous, whatever adjective, hunky history teacher of 6'5" saw me with tears on my face. Other kids saw me crying about it and having to pay for a book that I didn't get the pleasure of finishing. I think I did, at least a year later, read it again, because it was found, it was recovered and returned to the teacher, so that she got paid for a book that someone ended up finding and returning somehow. But I was ripped off. And so I was reading these depressing books, like Ordinary People, about a boy that was suicidal because his brother had died. And it was just a horrible year. And like The Miracle Worker with Helen Keller, it doesn't get much more depressing than that. Being blind and deaf. And just a lot of depressing books, just a lot of them, not any one book. But it just looked like everything that year. And the few things that I did enjoy reading, like the Lizard Lips book that I made a video about. The few books that actually brought me any happiness from being lighthearted. I wasn't supposed to read them because they happen to be just a little bit below my reading level. And it's like they would put the reading level of the book below the age of the character, and that was very confusing. Like a 4th grade book might be about middle schoolers, and a 7th grade book might be about high schoolers, and a high school book might be about adults. And so it's very confusing. And a lot of the books for older kids were very dark and depressing and just had stuff that I really shouldn't have been reading. And there were several times when my mom demanded that I change books because they had mention of orgies and other sexual things. And just a lot of things that my mom didn't like. My mom didn't like The Outsiders. And she really would have preferred I not choose that book in the first place. Just a really depressing year. Losing my book, losing my baby pillow, all around Christmas. And plus, it was the only year where I was so obsessed with my teacher that I was counting the days until the holidays were over and I could see him again. Come January, I mean, I'd never felt that way about any other teacher. No other year did I cry on the last day of school because I wouldn't be seeing that teacher anymore over the summer. So this video's gotten way too long. So yeah, The Outsiders. The movie was much better than the book. And, you know, just did not enjoy being in the 7th grade because in addition to everything else, I mean, there was enough depressing things in my life without being forced to choose books that were even more depressing than my life. So yeah, video's half-hour long. Go ahead and post it.
The train.